Luke Carter, a former Navy SEAL, was making his final perimeter check deep in the Wyoming forest as a brutal winter storm closed in. He believed it was just another quiet night, until his German shepherd, Ranger, suddenly exploded into frantic barking, claws tearing at the snow-covered ground near the trees. Luke followed the sound and found a wooden house engulfed in flames. Inside the deadly cold and smoke, he pulled out a young woman trembling and covered in ash. She claimed it was an accident, that she had nowhere else to go. But as the fire collapsed behind them and the storm began to howl, Luke realized something far more dangerous than the winter had just entered his life. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Winter had sealed the Wyoming forest under a white vow of silence, wind sharpening the cold into something that cut like memory itself. Luke Carter stood alone beneath the trees, the night pressing in on him the way it always did when storms came early and uninvited. Luke was 43, tall and broad-shouldered, built with the dense, functional strength of a man whose body had learned to endure before it ever learned to rest. His face carried sharp, angular lines, high cheekbones, a square jaw shadowed by a short, disciplined beard, gone prematurely gray at the edges. His hair, once regulation short, now brushed the collar of his jacket in unruly dark strands streaked with silver. His eyes were a muted steel gray, the kind that didn't glare or soften easily, eyes shaped by years of scanning horizons for threats that never announced themselves twice. He spoke little, moved efficiently, and carried himself with the quiet distance of someone who had learned that attachments were liabilities. The Navy SEAL teams had carved that into him long before the event that truly sealed his solitude, the winter he buried his wife, Hannah, after cancer hollowed her faster than war ever could. Since then, Luke had retreated into the forest not to hide, but to survive without pretending. His cabin was self-built, a low, sturdy log structure tucked deep among the pines, miles from the nearest paved road. No neighbors, no cell signal, just wood, fire, and rules that made sense. Ranger was part of those rules. The German shepherd was 4 years old, large even for his breed, with a thick black and tan coat dusted now with snow, amber eyes alert and unnervingly intelligent. Ranger wasn't a pet. He was a partner, trained but not broken, loyal but not needy. Luke had adopted him from a military working dog program after the dog's handler was killed overseas. Loss recognized loss. They understood each other without noise. Luke was checking the fence line when Ranger stopped. Not stiff, explosive. The dog lunged forward, nails biting into frozen earth, a deep bark tearing through the wind. This wasn't warning, this was alarm. Luke's hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt, as his gaze followed the line of Ranger's body toward the trees. Then he saw it. Orange light, weak but unmistakable, pulsing through snow and branches like a wounded heartbeat. Fire. Out here, fire was never an accident. Luke broke into a run, breath burning his lungs, Ranger streaking ahead like a shadow given purpose. The structure emerged through smoke and snowfall at the same time, a small wooden house older than his cabin, already losing the fight. Flames licked up one side where the wind fed them greedily, sparks dissolving into the storm. Smoke crawled low, thick and black, mixing with falling snow into a choking gray veil. Luke circled once, fast, assessing, front door compromised. Roof partially collapsed. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through fire and wind alike. A human voice, thin, fractured, alive. She was on the porch, half collapsed against the railing, ash streaked across pale skin. Emily Collins looked to be in her late 20s, small-framed, with long blonde hair tangled and singed at the ends, her face sharp but delicate beneath soot and fear. Her coat, expensive even ruined, hung open, revealing a sweater torn at the shoulder. One leg was twisted awkwardly beneath fallen timber, trapping her just far enough from the door to make escape impossible. Her eyes were an arresting blue, wide and glassy, not just with terror, but disbelief, the kind that comes when the world betrays you faster than you can process. She reached out blindly, fingers shaking, her voice breaking as she called for help, each breath a shallow victory. Luke didn't hesitate. He moved through smoke with practiced economy, covering Emily's head with his jacket, using his body as a shield against embers, while cutting away the broken beam pinning her leg. She cried out once, then bit it back, pride surfacing even in panic. He lifted her with care that looked rough but wasn't, hauling her clear just as part of the roof gave way behind them in a roar of sparks and heat. Ranger stayed close, circling, growling at the fire as if it were an enemy he could still defeat. They reached the tree line as the structure collapsed inward, the flames briefly flaring brighter before surrendering to snow. Emily coughed violently, clutching Luke's jacket like a lifeline. Up close, Luke noticed details that didn't fit the scene: the quality of her boots despite the damage, the faint trace of perfume beneath smoke, the way her hands trembled not just from cold but from something deeper. Shock, yes, but also calculation, habit. She looked at him as if trying to decide what kind of man he was and how dangerous that might be. "Thank you," she whispered, voice hoarse, eyes never leaving his face. Luke nodded once, already scanning the woods. The road, the dark. Fires didn't start themselves. People did. Somewhere out there, someone had left her behind. And Luke Carter, who had spent years avoiding the world, had just stepped back into its path. Behind him, Ranger sat in the snow, eyes fixed on Emily, head tilted slightly, not hostile, not friendly, just watching. The storm howled on, but something else had already begun to burn. Luke didn't remember deciding to carry her. His body simply did it, the way it had done things under fire years ago, before thought had time to interfere. Emily's weight was light in his arms, too light for someone wrapped in layers meant for winter, and that unsettled him more than the flames collapsing behind them. Her breath rasped against his neck, shallow and uneven, smelling of smoke and something floral that had no business surviving a burning house in the woods. Ranger stayed tight to Luke's left side, muscles bunched, ears pinned forward, his low growl vibrating like a warning wire stretched too thin. As they pushed through the trees toward Luke's cabin, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that made Luke slow, the faint crunch of footsteps somewhere behind them, distant but deliberate, not the frantic scramble of someone fleeing a fire. He turned once, scanning the dark between the snow-laden trunks, but saw nothing. Whatever had been there was gone, swallowed by storm and shadow, leaving only the uneasy certainty that the fire hadn't been as empty as it looked. By the time Luke kicked his cabin door open, Emily was shaking violently, her teeth chattering hard enough that her jaw ached. The cabin welcomed them with a rush of dry heat and the familiar scent of wood smoke and pine sap. It was a practical space, built for survival rather than comfort. Rough-hewn log walls, a wide stone fireplace already banked with coals, a heavy table scarred by years of use, and shelves lined with tools instead of ornaments. Luke set Emily down on a low bench near the fire, his movements firm but careful, and stepped back just far enough to assess her, the way he'd been trained to assess wounded teammates. Emily Collins, she gave her name after a moment, voice hoarse but controlled, looked younger in the firelight, late 20s at most. Her face was heart-shaped, sharp cheekbones flushed raw from heat and cold, lips cracked and pale. Her hair, a pale gold, had escaped its tie and fell in tangled strands around her face, singed at the ends. She held herself with a strange mix of fragility and restraint, shoulders drawn in protectively, but her spine straight, her chin lifting when she spoke, as if pride were a reflex she couldn't quite suppress. "It was an accident," she said, after Luke handed her a mug of water. Her fingers trembled, but her grip was steady. "I didn't know the stove was old. I tried to put it out." She swallowed, eyes flicking toward the door, then back to Luke. "I thought I could get outside. I thought—" Her voice faltered, and for a moment the fear looked real enough to satisfy anyone less accustomed to broken stories. Luke nodded once, neither agreeing nor disputing. He'd learned long ago that liars often told the truth first, then shaped it. Ranger settled in front of the fireplace, his large body blocking the worst of the draft, amber eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her shift, uncomfortably. She glanced at him, attempting a weak smile. "He doesn't trust me," she murmured. "He's smart," Luke replied flatly. He crouched to add wood to the fire, watching her reflection ripple across the polished iron of the stove door. Up close, the inconsistency sharpened. Her boots, though scorched, were Italian leather. Her coat, even ruined, had been tailored. Her hands, despite the soot under her nails, were manicured, the cuticles neat, the skin uncalloused. And beneath the smoke, that trace of expensive perfume lingered, subtle but persistent. None of it proved anything. Together, it told a story that didn't belong in a forgotten house miles from the nearest road. "You live out here?" Emily asked after a while, her gaze drifting around the cabin, lingering on the absence of personal clutter. "I do," Luke said. "No one else?" Just me and the dog." She hesitated, then added softly, "I was supposed to meet someone. He didn't come back." The way she said it, careful, measured, set Luke's jaw tight. He'd heard variations of that sentence spoken over body bags and hospital beds. Sometimes it meant abandonment. Sometimes it meant something worse. He chose not to press her, not yet. Survival came first. Truth could wait. Luke handed her a thick wool blanket and gestured for her to wrap herself. As she did, he noticed how she winced when shifting her right leg, the movement guarded, as if pain there was both real and useful. Ranger rose and took 2 slow steps closer, sniffing the air around her knee, then her hands. Emily froze, breath held. After a moment, the dog retreated to his spot, unimpressed but no longer growling. That, more than anything, eased a fraction of the tension in the room. Luke sat across from her, elbows on knees, his presence solid and unmoving. The wind battered the cabin walls, snow ticking against the windows like thrown gravel. Emily stared into the fire, its light dancing in her eyes, and something unreadable passed over her face. Relief, perhaps, or calculation, or both. Luke watched in silence, the soldier in him cataloging details, the widower in him feeling the faint, unwelcome tug of responsibility. Somewhere between the burning house and this quiet room, lines had been crossed. He didn't yet know by whom or why. What he did know was simple and heavy as the logs in his fire. Emily Collins was safe for the night, the storm was closing in, and whatever truth lay buried in the ashes would have to wait until morning. The second day arrived under a sky so low and heavy it seemed to press the forest flat, snow piling until the world felt padlocked in white. Luke woke before dawn out of habit, feeding the fire and listening to the wind claw at the cabin walls. Emily slept on the bench near the hearth, her breath shallow, her face softened by exhaustion rather than fear. Ranger lay between them, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded but awake in the way only working dogs ever were. When Emily stirred, she did so carefully, as if the morning itself might hurt her. She tried to stand, failed, and then sat back with a small, controlled exhale that told Luke the pain was real enough to matter. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't ask for help. That restraint, practiced and quiet, unsettled him more than pleading would have. "My leg," she said after a moment, voice steady. "I twisted it when the floor gave way. I can move, just not well." She tugged the blanket aside, revealing a knee wrapped in a makeshift bandage, swelling faintly beneath the cloth. Luke looked, nodded once, and said nothing. To him, bodies were problems to be solved, not stories to be weighed. He saw a barrier and began measuring it in his head. He went to the shed and came back with a tape measure and a carpenter's pencil, his movements precise, almost ceremonial. He measured the height of the cabin threshold, the distance to the porch, the angle the snow had drifted against the steps. Emily watched from the bench, puzzled, then quietly curious. Luke selected planks from a stack he kept dry under tarps, their surfaces rough, edges honest. He worked without hurry, sawing by hand to keep the noise low, drilling pilot holes, setting screws with care that bordered on reverence. Ranger followed the process like a foreman, sniffing boards, sitting when Luke gestured, moving when Luke shifted. The ramp took shape slowly, ugly and plain, a triangle of function rather than beauty. When Luke dragged it into place and tested it with his weight, it groaned but held. He adjusted the angle, tightened 2 screws, tested again. Satisfied, he rolled Emily's borrowed chair, an old spare he kept for emergencies, up the incline and stopped at the door. "It'll do," he said. There was no pride in his voice, only fact. Emily stared at the ramp as if it were a miracle disguised as lumber. She swallowed, eyes bright. "No one's ever built me anything," she said, and then corrected herself with a faint, self-aware smile. "No one's ever built me anything that mattered." Luke didn't respond. He helped her into the chair with firm hands, his grip sure, professional, respectful. On the porch, the air bit clean and sharp, the kind that cleared the head even as it numbed the skin. Emily closed her eyes and breathed, the tension easing from her shoulders. The forest stretched before them, endless and quiet, snow draped over branches like vows kept. Ranger sat at Luke's heel, chest out, proud, as if he had driven the screws himself. For a moment, the world was simple. That simplicity didn't last. Night fell early, as it did in winter, and the wind returned with a harsher edge. Luke took first watch by instinct, rocking gently in a chair, book unopened in his lap. The cabin settled and creaked. Emily slept fitfully, the kind of sleep that comes when the body is warm, but the mind refuses to be. Sometime past midnight, a sound pulled Luke fully awake, a soft scrape, then another, careful, controlled. He rose without noise, flashlight in hand, heart steady. He swung the beam toward the kitchen and then toward the window, and found Emily standing, not leaning, not bracing, standing as if she had always done so, stretching her shoulder, rolling her neck, working out stiffness with the absent-minded grace of habit. The light froze her in place. She turned, eyes widening, the color draining from her face. The lie, so carefully layered, collapsed in a single second. Luke didn't speak. He couldn't. He felt the weight of the ramp in his hands, the ache in his shoulders from sawing, the warmth of the porch air she'd breathed because he'd built it. Ranger woke with a happy huff, trotted forward, tail sweeping the floor. He saw Emily upright and barked once, bright, delighted, then pressed his head against her leg as if congratulating a child who'd learned to walk. The sound cut Luke deeper than any accusation could have. His dog, his clean thing, was celebrating the fracture. Emily reached down instinctively, then stopped, hands hovering, shame rushing in like cold water. "Luke," she whispered, "I can explain." He lowered the flashlight. The beam slid away. He turned it off. Darkness reclaimed the room, thicker than before. Morning came gray and merciless. Luke moved like a machine, feeding the fire, making coffee, not looking at Emily, not speaking to Ranger except in clipped commands. When he went outside, he kicked the ramp loose and dragged it into a snowbank, where it lay crooked and useless. Emily watched from the doorway, her throat tight, understanding at last the cost of what she'd done. She hadn't just lied. She had let a man believe. She had let a dog trust. Inside, Ranger paced, confused, glancing between them, the joy of the night before replaced by a low, questioning whine. Luke came back in, closed the door softly, and sat with his book again, eyes moving but seeing nothing. The warmth was still there, the fire still burned, but the room felt hollowed, as if something essential had been taken out and buried under the snow. Whatever truths Emily carried, whatever reasons she had, would no longer be heard. The ramp had bridged a gap. The truth had blown it apart. Morning broke without color, the sky a flat slab of iron pressing down on the forest. The storm had exhausted itself in the night, leaving behind a silence so complete it rang in Luke Carter's ears. He was outside before dawn, shoveling a narrow path away from the cabin steps, his movements rigid, mechanical, each thrust of the shovel driven by something colder than anger. Behind him, the ramp lay half buried where he had thrown it, a crooked scar against the snow. Inside, Emily stood at the window, wrapped in wool, watching his back with a weight in her chest she could not name. Ranger hovered between them, uncertain, his usual confidence replaced by a restless pacing that scuffed the floor. The sound came suddenly, shattering the quiet like glass. A deep rhythmic thump, distant at first, then growing, vibrating through bone and wood alike. Luke froze, shovel midair, head snapping up. He knew that sound, rotor wash, the noise of machines that arrived uninvited and left nothing, unchanged. Ranger erupted, not barking wildly, but planting his feet and unleashing a deep, resonant growl aimed at the sky itself. Snow lifted in spirals as a black helicopter crested the tree line and descended into the clearing, its presence obscene against the primitive stillness of the woods. Luke didn't move. He stood his ground the way he had learned to, shoulders squared, jaw locked, eyes tracking angles and exits even as old instincts woke and stretched. The helicopter settled hard, blades slowing, wind blasting snow into blinding sheets. A door slid open and a man jumped down lightly, boots barely sinking into the drift. He was in his mid-40s, tall and narrow, with the precise posture of someone accustomed to command. His name was Grant Harlow, and he wore wealth the way some men wore uniforms. His coat was cashmere, dark and perfectly tailored, collar turned up against the cold. His hair was dark, styled carefully despite the wind, his face sharp-featured, clean-shaven, handsome in a way that looked manufactured rather than earned. When he smiled, it was thin and practiced, never reaching his eyes. Grant's eyes were pale, assessing, and carried the bored confidence of a man who believed the world existed to be managed. Emily stepped onto the porch before Luke could stop her. The cold bit her bare feet through borrowed boots, but she stood straight, chin lifted. Grant's gaze flicked to her and softened into mock relief. "There you are," he said, voice smooth as polished stone. "You've caused quite the inconvenience." He glanced at Luke then, his expression shifting to mild curiosity, as one might inspect an old fence post. "So, this is where you ran off to?" Emily's hands curled into fists. "I didn't run," she said. "I left." Grant chuckled quietly. "You don't leave without telling me," he replied, tapping the side of his head. "Especially not with a satellite phone I paid to have tagged." The words landed like shackles. Luke felt something tighten in his chest, a hard, sour knot. He said nothing, but his grip on the shovel handle whitened his knuckles. Grant took a step toward Emily, reaching out as if to take her arm. Ranger moved instantly, stepping between them, his hackles raised, teeth just visible beneath curled lips. The growl that poured out of him was not loud, but it was absolute, a sound that promised consequence. Grant stopped short, surprise flickering across his face before irritation replaced it. He took a step back, adjusting his coat as though dignity could be smoothed back into place. "Control your dog," he snapped at Luke. Luke didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He watched Grant through peripheral vision the way he watched threats, calm, detached, ready. "He's under control," Luke said quietly. "You aren't." Emily drew in a breath that shook. "I'm not going with you," she said. The words sounded small in the open air, but they were solid. Grant stared at her, incredulous, then laughed sharply. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "You're cold, you're exhausted, and this—" He gestured dismissively at the cabin, the forest. "Luke, isn't real. Let's go home." Emily's eyes flicked to Luke, then to Ranger, who stood like a wall of fur and resolve. She shook her head. "This is real," she said. "What you do to me isn't." Something ugly twisted Grant's face then, a flash of temper breaking through the polish. "You're being foolish," he hissed. "You don't get to decide this." He stepped forward again, anger sharpening his movements. Ranger snapped at the air inches from Grant's hand. Not a bite, a warning. Grant recoiled fully this time, stumbling back a step, his confidence cracking. For the first time, Luke saw fear there, quick and raw. The helicopter's blades whined softly, as if urging retreat. Grant straightened, breathing hard, eyes darting between Luke and the dog. "This isn't over," he said, the threat thin but familiar. He backed away, boots crunching, then turned sharply and climbed back into the helicopter. The machine lifted, snow and noise and intrusion rising with it, until it vanished beyond the trees, leaving only silence behind. The clearing felt hollow once the sound was gone. Emily stood trembling, adrenaline draining from her limbs. Luke finally looked at her. His face was unreadable, carved from restraint and something deeper, darker. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't acknowledge what had just happened. "Don't talk to Ranger," he said, voice flat, final. Then he turned away, walking back toward the cabin without another word. Emily remained on the porch, tears stinging her eyes, understanding settling heavy in her chest. The helicopter had taken nothing with it, but it had left something broken behind. Inside, Ranger paced once, then lay down, confused and quiet. Outside, Luke resumed shoveling, each scrape of metal on snow, a punctuation mark on a sentence he would not finish. The storm had passed, the damage had not. Spring arrived in the mountains like an argument, not a promise, snow rotting into mud, ice breaking loudly as if offended by the sun. Emily was gone by the time the county plow finally clawed its way up the access road. Luke noticed the absence before he saw the empty bench. Ranger's unease told him first. The dog paced the cabin, stopping at the door, then the window, then the hearth, ears tipping forward as if listening for a voice that would not come. On the table lay a folded letter, weighted by a smooth river stone. Luke did not open it immediately. He rebuilt the fire, fed Ranger, washed his hands, and only then unfolded the paper with the careful reluctance of a man bracing for shrapnel. Emily's handwriting was neat, restrained, the words chosen like steps across thin ice. She wrote without excuses and without apologies theatrics. She told him who she was, a wealthy heir raised in rooms where affection was negotiated and surveillance passed for care, and admitted she had used a lie to test a world she no longer trusted. She wrote that the fire and the storm had taught her what contracts never could. Trust is not a clause you insert. It is a bridge you build and stand on together. She named Ranger, described the moment his head rested on her knee, and how it had felt like absolution she didn't deserve. She ended simply, promising to leave nothing behind but truth. and hoping, no, not hoping, accepting that Luke owed her nothing. Luke folded the letter and placed it in a small tin box beneath the stairs, the box where he kept Hannah's watch and the one photograph that still made him breathe wrong. He felt no relief, only a quieter ache. Weeks passed, snow retreated, the forest reeked of thaw and sap. Luke returned to routine, the kind that kept men intact when feelings threatened to pry them apart. Then the bank letter came. Thick paper, polite language, finality disguised as courtesy. His mortgage, every dollar, every predatory interest, paid in full. The signature at the bottom was not Emily's, but a corporate officer's neat block letters, the payer listed as a family holding company. Luke recognized from news he did not follow. The anger arrived first, sharp and righteous. A SEAL does not accept rescue bought with money. He paced the cabin, jaw locked, seeing the ramp, the shovel, the silence after the helicopter. Then the anger thinned, peeled back by arithmetic he could not escape. Without the payment, the land would have been seized. Hannah's place, her place, sold to strangers. Emily had not bought him. She had cut the chain at its weakest link. Luke sat until dusk, the letter heavy in his hands, and Ranger nudged a bright red rubber ball into his boot, tail thumping once, hopeful. Luke stared at the ball, garish, indestructible, and did not throw it, not yet. But he did not kick it away either. By the time the mud dried enough for an old truck to climb the road, Luke had learned to live with the new quiet, a quiet that was no longer pure, but was honest. The truck coughed into the clearing one afternoon, paint sun-faded, tires mismatched. Emily stepped out and stopped where she was, hands in her jacket pockets, giving the land the courtesy of distance. She looked different. The expensive edges were gone. She wore denim, wool, boots scarred by work. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot, her face bare of polish, skin wind-chapped and real. She did not smile. She did not plead. She waited. Luke approached with the measured caution he once reserved for ceasefires. He saw the fatigue in her shoulders and the steadiness in her eyes. She spoke first, voice low. "I won't take the money back," she said. "It was never meant to buy forgiveness. It was meant to keep a promise you didn't ask me to make." Luke told her, blunt and calm, that he would not be owned. She nodded, accepting the boundary as one accepts weather. "You aren't," she said. "The bank was." She gestured to the forest. "This stays yours." Ranger broke the tension the way only dogs can. He sprinted, skidding in mud, collided gently with Emily's knees, then circled once and dropped the red ball into her lap with a proud snort. Emily laughed, a sound startled out of her, and rolled the ball back. Ranger pounced, tail a blur, the game declared without committee. Luke watched the exchange, something in his chest loosening by degrees. He understood then that forgiveness is not a verdict, it is a practice. It begins small. It begins with a ball. They stood there until the sun dipped behind the ridge. Emily did not ask to stay. Luke did not invite her to leave. When the cold sharpened, he nodded once toward the cabin. "Inside," he said. "It's dropping fast." The words were rough, but they carried warmth. The door closed behind them, the fire took. Ranger sprawled between their feet, and the mountain exhaled. Ashes do not disappear, Luke knew. They feed. The soil. What grows next depends on what you plant. He set the kettle on, feeling, for the first time since winter, that something living had been given room to root. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder or blinding light. They come quietly, through an open door at the right moment, a kindness that asks for nothing, or the faithful eyes of a dog that recognizes truth before words ever can. In this story, the miracle was not that the fire was survived or the storm passed, but that truth was spoken, trust was restored, and 2 wounded lives were set free. This is often how God works. He does not force his hand. He plants hope in ashes and waits for life to rise. In our daily lives, amid bills, old wounds, broken relationships, and the fear of trusting again, God is still present. He works through ordinary people who choose extraordinary faithfulness, a quiet act of mercy, a boundary held with dignity, a forgiveness that costs something. When we choose honesty over comfort, courage over control, love over fear, that is where God's miracle begins. If this story spoke to your heart, remember this: you are not alone in your winter. You may feel as though all you can offer is something small, a single step, a simple kindness, a trembling truth, but God sees it, and he multiplies it. Please share this story with someone who may need warmth today. Leave a comment and tell us what part of this story reflected your own journey. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of loyalty, healing, faith, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and those you love. May He protect you through every storm, guide you in the silence, and give you the strength to trust again, love again, and walk in truth every single day.